Welcome to Different Dadpreneurs. And on this show, we look under the hood of dadpreneurs that are intentionally crafting unique businesses and lifestyles. And super excited to have Dylan Jones on today, who owns Profit Launchpad, which delivers coaching and consulting for local service businesses. Dylan, stoked to have you and excited to dive into your journey.
Thanks for having me, Fyfe. This is going to be fun.
So we'll start off with, when did you first realize you wanted to be an entrepreneur? When was that first little inkling for you?
I don't know. It's kind of, I never had that, I'm going to be an entrepreneur moment. I remember when I was in grade 11, my buddy and I started a eaves trough cleaning company. And we went and, got flyers printed out and spent, 1,000 flyers, something like that. And the only call back we got was from someone to tell us we spelled Eves wrong. But the joke was his name was Adam, so we did Adam's Eves, and Eves was spelled Eve from the Bible. It wasn't EAVE, it was EVE, and so the only callback we got was he spelled Eves wrong. Well, I guess nobody really got that. And honestly, I think when it really kind of kicked off in my head is I had an entrepreneurship opportunity. So I started my career in the junior mining industry, and started basically on the ground level and then worked my way up into finance, and was given an opportunity to take control of a company that would be I'd have to go raise the money with the managing partner of the overarching firm I worked for, but then I would run the organization as my own entity. And so it wasn't a pure kickoff in entrepreneurship, but it was certainly a very entrepreneurial venture. And that went really well. And I was really, really excited by that. Oh, wait, you can, the career prospect for me before that was more, going through the finance and operations kind of world. And what is where do you end up there? It's CEO of a mining company type of thing. And this was a whole new world to me of, you can just take an idea and run with it and go try to find money and build something. And I've been kind of doing that ever since, to be honest. So that was that would have been 12 years ago. 12-ish years ago. And so since then I built a couple companies, I've sold a couple companies, I've crashed and burned one company. And just recently I've been focusing on more on this services side of business. So helping businesses grow, not quite from the ground up, but from the $500,000 range upwards. And services in like you said, right? In lead gen and helping guys figure out how to make money, which is always the hardest part is if you come from a tech, you're a technician in trades or a blue collar technician, it's well, how the hell do you actually make money? How do people get to me? So solve that. And then we have, the consultancy side of Profit Launchpad, which does a lot of operations automation, profit optimization, which typically makes a lot more sense for companies over, kind of $2 million range.
Awesome. And so those companies that are doing 2 million plus, what would be a couple of the key things you'd be helping them with?
Yeah, that's a great question. The big thing is mapping out how your business works. So by the time you get to it depends. If you're on more the B2C services side, you're not going to get there that fast. But if you're doing commercial contracts for plumbing, HVAC, electrical, you can get to 2 million pretty darn quick. If you even have a decent network. And so when you get to that size, it's kind of around 3 million, to be honest, is when things really start imploding. But we see the cracks at 2. And what those businesses and their operations realize they've never really thought about a process. They've never really thought about how do we deliver whatever the product or the service is to completion, get paid in full, have the optimal amount of profit per project, have that money taken and put into the proper account and everyone paid on time. It's always just someone they've figured it out, and maybe there's some written systems or something like that, but typically none of that exists. So we do a full mapping of the core drivers of a business. And it's just based on 5 pillars. So you have your traffic, which is marketing, your conversion, which is sales, then you have delivery or production, which is your operations. Operations is kind of tied to the whole thing, but that's kind of your what people traditionally think of as operations. Your cash management, which at a lot of people call finance, but at that smaller company, it's really just cash management, and then leadership. So around the 2 to 3 million mark, you get into the place where like the owner can't do the founders led sales and the project management and the bookkeeping and the marketing anymore. And so we have to look at like leadership succession, etc. So we build a operating model around those pillars. The best part, like, a lot of blue collar owners, if there's any listening to this, like the best part is people have been doing this for like hundreds of years, is building successful blue collar companies to deliver a product and service. And so mapping out how your systems currently work and then applying like deep institutional knowledge on how they should work is actually really simple because it's so well documented. And like a lot of these guys we work with, we just call them going from like technicians to owners, right? And then so our kind of like stepped process is technician, operator, owner, CEO. And that takes a long time. It's not something that you can just like call yourself a CEO and you are. Like I know legally you are, but the like idea that the only thing you do every week is an hour's worth of work reviewing a dashboard of 10 metrics, and then a couple of calls after that to make sure any metrics that you were quite happy with are resolved. Like that's when I think of like you're in the CEO seat and you're making those big calls and you have people doing the right work. And so that like roadmap is ultimately where we're trying to take the people we work with on the consultancy side. And then the front end, the program and the course and the coaching and things like that is all an ascension tool to help guys elevate themselves at a much lower cost into that world. Because if like you were to come at like a smaller business and come to the consultancy side and say like, well, I want to do that. It's like, yeah, that's going to like cost 50, 60 grand. And guys go, oh shit, I don't have that much cash. Like, yeah, of course you don't. You're a small company. So let's work towards that. That's the way I've formatted the business. And so far it's kind of the way that it's working quite well.
And I'm guessing a lot of these people are parents or dads that you're working with.
Yeah. So by the time, I'd say from like the coaching perspective, it's pretty mixed bag. Like you have like 30% parents, 30% married, 30% single. But when we get into like the more established businesses, the technician to owner, when you see guys' eyes really light up is when you're like, yeah, you could make twice as much as you're making and work half as much and spend more time with the family. That's where for my kind of long-term perspectives is like where I love it. I love seeing that like eyes light up. Because the younger guys and like, nothing wrong with it. Like they're after one thing, and that's to grow like crazy and make lots of money. So you tell them like, oh yeah, you can, make lots of money, work less, and have a family. They're like, I don't know if I care that much. But you have the guy who's already got kids or planning kids with the wife, and you're like, yeah, you could spend like your mornings, have every morning with them, or pick them up from school every day. And they're like, hell yeah, that's worth. Quite honestly, some of these guys, it's worth a couple $100 grand a year. They're willing to sacrifice by hiring a GM or hiring a bigger team to properly manage the business. But they get to spend that time with the kids when they're young, especially, is like, it's super cool.
What are some of the things that you've done in your business now that you have kids? Like, what are you doing differently? How has being a dad shaped how you run your business?
I'd say the biggest thing, I've always been a big office guy. I like offices and I like having like the collaborative environment, but I switched to remote only. And I did that purposefully so that so I get up at, just to give you kind of a snapshot of the day, I get up at 5 and I hit I go grab a cup of coffee, have a cup of water, kind of wash my face a little bit. And then I'm on the computer at like 5:15. And I work until typically like 7:15. And then I spend the next hour and a bit with the kids until they go off to daycare. And then I work until 4. And then I go pick up my oldest boy. And so I pick him up every day and I eat breakfast with him every day. And that to me is like, that was a big sacrifice because honestly, like working from home is kind of a bitch. It's, I'm in an office by myself with a closed door all day. It can be very like isolating and very like you get stuck in this system of
you get in like
like
You get stuck in like
small
your
world.
own little echo chamber if you're not careful.
Yeah, and so I have some good networking groups that I use, but like that sacrifice is worth it. Other things like I don't pick up the phone on Sundays. It doesn't matter if someone's house or business is burning down. Like, deal with it yourself. I don't know, there's like lots of little things, but ultimately for me, it's like there's a lot of focus on ensuring like I spend. I guess one thing I didn't say is like when I go pick up my oldest at 4, like I'm with him until bedtime, which is 8:30. And so like I don't miss swimming lessons. I don't miss bedtime. And the sacrifice for me is my business grows slower. I mean, that's the reality. And I think a lot of people try to do both. And we had our second just at the end of 2023. So he's only 10 months still. And that was a real kick in the ass of being, oh, you can't do anywhere near as much as you thought you could. Right. And so then looking at like, okay, well, I have this like growth trajectory. What's the reality of it? It's like if I have to like stretch it out over years, right? So it's a sacrifice, and I'm very glad to make it because for me, like in anyone who has kids or little kids, and I'm like right in the middle of little kids, and I know you're right in the middle of little kids, like they're like babies for like what, 6 months, and then they're like, or I guess they're infants for 6 months or however it works, and then they're babies. And then they're like kind of big babies, and then they're toddlers, and then they're little kids. And it's like, that baby's gone, man. And like, that baby after 6 months is gone. It ain't coming back unless you have another one and you're stupid like us. But the same, like my little boy's 3, man. He's still a toddler, but like I can, he's speaking very clearly. He's, like he's been out of diapers for a year. Like he's not really like that little. And even though he is really little, he's still like, there's some big boy moments. And you're like, holy shit, this is happening fast. And it's like, I feel like when a kid's like 15 to, or like 18, maybe, I don't know, 18 to like 40, don't change that much comparatively to his like first 6 years. So I'm trying to just embrace that of being like my ambition to have, an 8-figure consultancy and coaching company would mean that I would not see my kids as little kids.
And I'm curious about how you've reconciled that, like your own expectations of your business competing with your expectations of how you want to show up as a dad. I think it's like constantly for guys, it's butting heads. And how did you come to the point where it sounds like you feel quite confident and settled in your decision with how you're doing it?
Yeah, I mean, financially it's hard sometimes when it's like I want to make a big investment in the business. Like the cash just isn't there. Our businesses are profitable. Our businesses are doing well. But, it's only 2 years I've been running Profit Launchpad. It's been 1 year for the coaching program. So they're both pretty brand new. And, if I want to go write a $200,000 check to hire a fractional CMO from like some, $10 million coaching company to come build out my process, is like, I can't write that check yet. And I've been in the position with past businesses where I like could, and it can be very frustrating when you're like, oh man, I'm just have to grind for like another couple months just to get enough cash to do like the next thing. But the grind is like 8-hour days. It's like the old way to grind was you just get up and you work all day and do that for a few months to get through the thing. And I have to be very measured. And what I find is it causes me, like personally, the way it manifests is like it causes a lot of anxiety. So then I have to have like, all the structures in place for me. Like, am I getting enough exercise? Am I getting enough sleep? Am I eating healthily? Not drinking too much? Like those things, obviously, like not spending all day, like, doom scrolling. I find if those things are in check, then the anxiety stays in check, which then I can focus and stay on the path. And like, it's all like trickle down, right? Like knock on effect. But it's all built into the fact that like the solution, I don't accept the traditional solution, which is just work until it's resolved. Because I've seen a lot of guys in like different networking groups or different business groups, or even clients I have who are in their 50s, And they're like, yeah, I've just been doing this for the last 20 years. And you're like, so like, what's your relationship with your kids? And like, I don't have one. I missed them growing up. And I'm like, okay, so this, like, how is this worth it at all? Right? Like, business is like, it's super fucking hard. And I think a lot of people think like, it's like that 6 feet from gold principle. Like you're just always around the corner from gold. And I think if you like live more in the present and build the gold in today, that includes the things that are really important to you. Then like it's a lot easier to manage. Like I totally recognize too, because I work on this with a lot of clients, is like everyone has different needs. My goals are like more time with family to hunt, fish, ski. I don't really give a shit about, like, we go on nice vacations every year, but I don't need to own like, I don't need to fly private. I don't need to, go to the $50,000 a week place in Bora Bora. Like, I don't care. Like, I want to go to Cache Creek and go fish trout. And so the guys who want that, they want to go own a penthouse in, I don't know, like Boca Raton. Like, yeah, you got to work differently. Like there's just, you have to make a lot more cash. And, I guess I'm lucky that my tastes aren't that high, but you can work it out. Like, I think anyone can really work it out in terms of like what their vision is and what they need from a financial standpoint and make it work.
What's been the most challenging time that you've had as an entrepreneur?
Fucking 6 months ago.
Tell me about it. What was going on?
So the actual hardest like ever was in 2019. I had to close a business and it wiped me out financially. There's a saying in business that I heard after that, unfortunately, that you never bet to zero, right? Like you never put everything into something, in terms of like, so that when if you lose, you're out of the game. It's like an old gambling adage, right? Like you always have a 10% holdback. So if you do lose, you can get back in the game. I didn't know that. I bet like 110%. And so I got smoked in the downturn there in 2020, I guess it was. Absolutely fucking smoked. As the kids would say today, I got cooked. And so that was super hard financially, but ultimately, like, probably some of the best lessons I've ever learned. And it also brought me into a network of guys where I realized like some of the most successful business owners I know, who are, have like, what would it be, 9 figures, if not billions. They're like, oh yeah, that's your first loss, man. Congrats. You're like, kind of popped your cherry type of deal, like that's welcome to business.
What would you say, like, top 3 lessons for you that you've taken from that?
Okay, so number 1, I already said, don't bet to zero. Number 2 is like team. It's all about team. So unfortunately, I didn't have a bad team. They're all really good people. They were not the right people. And I didn't know at that time how to build that team. I've totally changed that. Everything to me is now team. Assessments, hiring super slow, super clear in my hiring process. And the third one would be, know the size of your market, right? Like, so what we were selling as alternative protein products was cricket protein, so insect protein in protein bars and powders, which at the time, because I was in like the natural foods and fitness world, seemed like a great idea. There was companies popping up everywhere and we were all raising money and we were doing well. What I realized after was that we were in an echo chamber of like health foods. And as soon as we went mass market, it just like the customer acquisition cost went like 10x. And it was like, okay, well, if the customer acquisition cost 10x, my revenue is not 10x, and the business just was not viable. So that's a really good one. If you're in a traditional service, like a plumbing company, like, yeah, you probably have a big enough market. Like, yeah, it's a red ocean because everyone can do it, but you probably have enough clients if you're good at it. Whereas if you're into something new, like, you really have to spend that time to figure out or pivot well, like, pivot really well. But those would be my 3 lessons. So aside from like that business failing, the last 6 months, having a second kid and having like a new business launching at the same time was a bad idea. Holy shit.
So before we get into that, I'm curious about what the recovery was from that quote unquote failure, those lessons that you learned. Because I think I'm assuming there's some processing time when that actually happened, making sense of that and recovering, getting your feet back on the ground. How did you go about doing that?
So it took me years for sure. I think I'm still in the recovery process, to be honest. Like, because I don't know if it's like still in the recovery process. It's like a change. So I'd only won up until that point, right? Like youngest technical mining CEO in like the industry, made a ton of cash. A couple companies went really well. And so I'd only won up until that point, and then it just like all blew up in my face. And so I had like a major crisis of identity, ego, ability. And what I like my recovery process through that was like really digging into what I wanted, who I was, and like like I worked for that company. It was called Coast Protein for 3 and a bit years. Like, dude, like 90-hour weeks minimum. And I know everyone's always says like, oh, I work 80-hour weeks. And I'm like, no, man, like I was on the manufacturing floor. I was on sales calls. I was doing demos in stores. Like I wasn't in the office, doing things for 80 hours. I was working my ass off, and so was my team. And like an 80-hour week is grueling. And I did that for years. So I like physically burnt myself. I injured my back because I was just like, my body was all screwed up from that much work. And I barely paid myself anything because I kept putting it back into the business. And then of course, when the business imploded, I had no money. And so like there's a physical toll, but then like the emotional toll was like at that time I was in my early 30s, right? So around me is all my friends and peers buying houses and like quote unquote starting their life. And I had to like watch all that go by and was like, oh, great. Like, the guy who's and not disparaging anyone's like employment, but the guy who's like picked the steady government job or a teacher is buying a house, and I'm like, the superstar entrepreneur. And I can't barely afford to put a tank of gas in my truck, So that was tough, and it just had to really learn to be like happy and like be present type of deal, like more intentional in what I actually want. And I find like now I'm not that I'm good at it. I still suck, but like I find a lot of time when I'm feeling like annoyed that I don't have X or I haven't achieved Y, I don't really care about that. It's just because I'm looking at someone else who has it. And like my wife called me on this the other day. A neighbor of mine for his 40th birthday, so he's 2 years older than me, bought like a brand new Audi Q something. I was like, oh man, that's crazy. Like he's buying, a nice car, and like we're still building this business and stuff's like, A, you could buy that car if you wanted to, and B, do you even like that car? I was like, and then she's like, then why do you care? I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I was like, yeah, I guess I could go buy that car because, shit. But I have no interest to, because it's like I'm working towards something that's bigger, right? And that is like my biggest thing, is that I think my biggest lesson is I can like pull that back. It still happens, but I can pull it back to that point of like, what is my actual intention?
And I think it takes work to know what that intention is and that vision is, to have that front of mind. And then I think the other piece too, that same as you, like I still get hung up on that stuff. I'm just way faster at course correcting and getting back to like, I actually don't care about that.
Yeah.
But it's like a muscle that takes time to recognize and then be able to actually shift out of that. And also having a wife that can call you out on it and see it faster than you can is also awesome.
Super important. Listening to your spouse is something that I learned a lot about that process. And but like what you said, I used to take, if I had a bad day, it could spiral to a bad week. And now it's like I can feel that bad. I feel the anxiety going up, frustration with the kids. Picking crappy food, don't want to exercise, and I'm like, I'll just hit the eject button and be like, I'm just gonna chill, watch a movie tonight, like no work, no phone, get a good night's sleep, and the next day I wake up like it's pretty good, and that used to be a weak spiral that would take me like out of the game. And so yeah, you're right, like it's just like a muscle. You just get stronger. I don't think it ever goes away. It's just like the ability to lift, used to, when I would when I was into powerlifting, you know, like when you start like benching 160 is hard. And then all of a sudden I'm sitting there benching like 295. And it's like, what the hell happened here? It's
Yeah.
like, oh, I just got stronger.
Looping back to the last 6 months or 6 months ago, because I asked you what your biggest challenge was. You were just starting the business, you had your second kid. Walk me through what that felt like. And again, like you're talking to somebody who might be stepping into that same thing. Like, what are some of the things they might be walking into that they're not aware of, and what helped you through that?
So I think the best way to explain it is just like tell you about a scenario that I will never forget. And it's right after we had, so my first son's name is August, second son's name is Remy. And Remy, like Augie has never been a good sleeper, ever. Remy's pretty good, but he got RSV at like 20 days old. So we were in the hospital. He was hooked up to IVs he had to get, he wasn't on a rebreather, but he was on a respirator,
And
which is just like a little mask.
for people like me that don't know what
than-
RSV stands for.
I actually don't know. Something respiratory,
Okay.
something virus. What's the S? It's like a really bad flu, and
Okay.
for a 20-day-old, it's like not a good thing. So, anyways, that was brutal, right? I called all my clients at the time. I just sent an email, said, listen, you're not going to hear from me until you hear from me. My son is sick. He's in the hospital. None of this is important. Best of luck. I love you all. And I had one guy out of like 12 clients quit. Only one. So it was really good. Everyone else was like, cool, talk to you when you get back. And so we get home and Remy is fussing because he's still like congested and this shit. And so you're like, you know, we're on like 3-4 hours of sleep a day type of deal. And but we hadn't seen Augie in a little bit because we were at the hospital and he was with my parents. So I like finally get Remy down. I'm like, oh man, thank God I got him down. He's sleeping. He looks good. And then I hear this, Dada, I gotta go pee pee. And it was just like this light bulb moment. It was like, shit, there's two of them. Just like, oh my God. So that night, I think I literally slept an hour. And then it was like, okay, well, I have a choice of getting up and working or not. And like, I have to make whatever choice I'm going to make. So then it was just months of lack of sleep, like just exhausted, but also having to think strategically and then apply like my skills tactically through client work. And that was very, very difficult. Like it was just so like beyond, and I had to change the way I work. You know, because I was like on calls 6 hours a day, right? By the third hour, I'm just like, yeah, what's your problem? Like, you know, yeah, I just excel more, you know? So I found the response to that was I hired a coach to teach me about productizing a coaching service. And so, you know, the simple version of what that means is like going to group coaching, but there's a lot more to it. And so I was like, okay, well, that's going to take a while to implement. And I'm kind of on cohort 3 now of that and pivoting. And then I hired a manager for the consultancy to just kind of handle. I actually don't do much over there now, which is nice. And said no to basically everything else. And the thing that I've really learned in this process of, again, like putting my kids first as a choice is like, I'm ruthless with opportunity. Because my opportunity cost is not like, it's not monetary, it's time with kids. So if someone comes to me with like an opportunity, I had one yesterday, this guy pitched me a whole deal. Like, man, I must come off as the biggest jerk, but I'm just like very like, what is the opportunity? What do you need from me? What are we planning? What are the financials? What have you done? What have you achieved? I almost in a way like feel like I'm back in my private equity days of like, almost like asking them, it is an investment for me, right? Like I don't look at it as like an employment opportunity. I don't look at it as a cash opportunity. I look at it as an investment of me and my time. And I'm like really ruthless with it. So that's been something that's come out of that I love. Is I used to be like, yeah, shit, when you have no kids, it's like I'll do anything and everything. Now I'm like, I have an ROI threshold that's probably like aggressively high. And if you don't meet those terms, then no thanks. Like all the best. Like, I don't think it means it's a bad idea. It just
Yeah.
means that it's not for me.
Where are other boundaries that you've set that have been helping you in business or personal life? That sounds like a pretty big one, and having like a very clear, what does that ROI need to look like for you to say yes to something? Curious where
Mm-hmm.
else you've set structures or boundaries to help you manage both, like being a dad and an entrepreneur.
I gotta give a shout out to my man Dan Martell, and I think that that's right here. Yeah, I don't know if you can see it in the screen, but it's called
Yeah.
"Buy Back Your Time." Super great book. I Any listener, I highly recommend getting it and following. So I've always had assistants, but I hired an E. She only works 4 hours a day. Like it's not crazy and it's not expensive. And I just given her like, here's my email, and we followed his process of like, here's how my email works. I don't want to ever look at my email, and then like, here's how my schedule works. I don't want to ever book an appointment. And then being like, I'd say I'm like 90% strict with both of those. Like, I will jump in to resolve things if like I can just help, but for the most part, just being like, I always break my own rules. I think it's like the sign of a good entrepreneur is you're always trying to improve your processes. But like when it comes to schedule and email, it's so easy for an entrepreneur to spend 4 hours a day in their email and get like, I got a bunch of work done. It's like, no, you didn't really do anything to move the needle forward. And so that, like, for me, is that schedule is pretty hardcore set. And we review it every day. And if it doesn't fit in, if she's like, well, you booked yourself for like 20 hours of internal work because you want to launch like a bunch of new content for next week. And it's like, oh yeah, you're right. None of these meetings are important. Push them off 2-3 weeks, right? And I think that's like a huge, and that's like gone into my personal life. Like, I've started applying like that idea of like opportunity cost and value to my friendships, and not in a way of like, you have to provide me something to be my friend. It's not like that. I'm not like a psychopath. But if it's like, hey, do you want to come? It's Tuesday. You want to come to the bar because I don't have a wife or kids? Like, no.
Yeah.
Like, maximizing, like, if we're going to spend time with someone, like really wanting to spend time with them and thinking like that intentionality. Like, I think, we're both from Vancouver. There's like, Vancouver's pretty famous for saying yes and then not showing up. And so I've really worked hard on being like, no, I can't come to that for these reasons, but I would love to come to something in the future. And I found the response from that from my friends and family to be like overwhelmingly positive, where they're like, yeah, no worries. Like, most people are like, yeah, no worries. But a lot of people are like, oh, thanks for like actually thinking about it. And I think we use that word of like intentionality, like probably too much, but it is really trying to be like, why would I go there? What would the result be? What else do I have to do this
Yeah, and
week?
I think it's refreshing for people when they get a very clear response instead of being like, I'm not sure yet. It's like getting like a no, I can't come, and this is why. I have a lot of respect for people when they do that with me, and I try and do that as well. But I think that can only happen when you have very clear values and personal boundaries and like clear vision of what's important to you. And I think,
Yeah, 100%. I was like classic, like before kids, I was classic. I just said yes to everything on the weekend, and I'd show up to whatever I want to show up to. And I don't know, it's like whatever, this time of life. But I think now it makes me feel so like good being at an event and not being on like my phone because I'm worrying about like not being in another event, or like the work I didn't do, or the friend that I'm standing up, and just being like this weekend we were at the pumpkin patch twice, and we had 3 birthdays, and I enjoyed every single one of them. Like, kids' birthdays can be sometimes not the most fun thing in the world, especially when it's like with daycare friends or people you don't really know. But yeah, I enjoyed all 3 of them because it was just like, this is what we're doing. This is a birthday weekend. We're going to go and we're going to talk to some new people. We're going to eat some crappy food. We're going to pet some goats. We're going to be at the pumpkin patch twice, 2 different pumpkin patches. But like, and I find a lot of the dads I work with, can get really like frustrated by the amount of time they have to spend with their kids. And I get it, because when you're on like the third hour of a hard bedtime, you're like, I don't really want to be doing this right now anymore. But I think what I often challenge them on is like, I don't think you don't want to spend time with your kids. I just don't think you thought about all the other things that how they're going to work together this week. And you're stressed because you didn't give yourself enough time. And like, I can't, man, I just read this book. Shit. I just read a book. I can't remember what it's called. But the one thing that I really took away from it was like, there's no such thing as like time is meant is quite wishy-washy, but like, or maybe not wishy-washy, but like, like big brained, like kind of cerebral, I guess is the best word. Where he's like, there's actually no such thing as time. Like it's just a human construct, right? Like a day is not actually 24 hours. We say it is. So it's like, it's not literally 24 hours. So there's not literal time in existence. And it's like, okay, sure, whatever. But his like whole point was like, when you say, I don't have enough time to do that, it's like, what you're actually saying is, I'm not prioritizing that above something else. And I actually started adopting that. Like, I don't say I don't have time. I just say, this other thing is more important, or this other thing I have to do, and therefore I can't do this thing. I actually have the time to do it all, but I prefer not to. And that has been like a real game changer, to be honest. I wish I could remember the
4,000
book.
weeks?
It's really annoying.
Because that was also a
No.
really great one on time and time management. But I think there's something to be said there. There's an aspect of, there's a perspective of being at choice with how you're spending your time when you take that approach. And I think that's a good segue to probably my last question for you, which is, in the long run, what do you want your legacy to be? You're raising kids, you're building a business. What is it that you want to leave your kids with in terms of how you're doing both of those things right now? So not necessarily like, oh, I'm going to build this business so I can give them X money, but like, what is it that you really want to equip them with or leave them with by being an entrepreneur and a great dad?
Yeah, I always struggle with this one. I think for me, what I want to leave them is a roadmap to prosperity without the roadmap to prosperity without like the gift of everything. So like, here's how I did it, and I can teach you some parts of it, but I think like prosperity in our current like societal like lexicon is kind of is more like, prosperity. One person might be like a stable job as a doctor or a garbage man, whereas prosperity to others is like lots of financial wealth or financial means, and others it's like lots of kids. Some people start having kids at like 25 and they have 10 of them. And so my map is like prosperity. And the other one for me that is really, really important to me that I didn't have, and not by like, just my parents just weren't equipped with the lessons, is like helping them identify, not like saying like you have to be this in the future, but helping them identify the areas that have like interest, but also like a reasonable roadmap to success. Again, whatever success is what they define, and like helping them navigate like how to get to the points where they have to make a decision, and helping them make that decision by like asking questions that I've learned, right? Like one of the things that I never really got growing up was deep introspective questions. Like it was like, go to university and you'll be successful. Okay, well, you graduated university with a degree. Like I was in environmental science, right? Like, well, now like you should go into business. It was like, well, how the fuck does an environmental science with an undergrad degree in 2010, like still in the worst financial crisis in the history of the world, except for the Great Depression, how do I go into business? Like, what does that mean? And I know for sure, like at a certain point, there's a level of responsibility you have to take on as an adult for yourself. But like, I got no guidance on like what questions to ask. Like I was very much, finished high school with good grades. So go to UBC and get good grades and a degree that interests you, and you will get the riches of the world. And then the riches of the world were like, well, you could go work in Yukon and pick up dirt for fucking $30 an hour. It was like, okay, okay, that sounds good, I guess. So,
well,
yeah.
I don't know. I think something I'm taking away from this little bit of the conversation, previous generations, that playbook worked. Go to university, get a job, like that worked as a playbook. And I think the interesting for me when I consider it is the playbook for me likely is not going to be the playbook that works for the next generation. So it's like, what are those root fundamental principles or tools or skills that I can share that won't matter at like what the playbook actually is? It's how you implement the tool that will get you to where you want to be.
Yeah. 100%. That's exactly what I'm trying to. You said that really well. Like, I have no idea, man. AI is probably going to take all our jobs in the next 3 years. So how am I supposed to tell my kids who are 3 and 10 months old what to do when they grow up? Like nobody knows. But again, asking, like, being able to ask those questions, the roadmap with the questions, the inflection points, and actually like conscious about helping them rather than being like, not so much you're on your own, but like you'll figure it out, but be like, all right, like hey man, the one thing I have over you is 35 years of experience of making mistakes. So let me use those experienced years to help you make decisions that are somewhat informed. I think that's a pretty, like, honestly, when you look at the grand scheme of things, that's a pretty sweet thing to be able to deliver to a kid, like an 18-year-old. And I don't know what you, but when I was like 18, I was fired up on testosterone. I was trying to play professional lacrosse, but I was playing semi-pro lacrosse. And it was like, all I cared about was like, the babes on Friday and the beers on Saturday and like playing lacrosse. And it was like, was I going to listen to like sage long-term advice? Fuck no. But I was able to listen to like, hey, what do you think about where you're at in life? Do you want to do this forever? Like, no, I probably want to do this till I'm like 22. Okay, it's like, okay, so what are you going to do at 22? And it's like, I don't know. And for me, it was always like told, you'll figure it out. You'll be fine. You're smart. Like, man, I lost a lot of years trying to figure it out. I could have used some of that support. So, yeah, that's pretty much it, man. Like, I also have like a kind of like serious kind of joking is I have like I'm focused right now on buying a chunk of land. I actually put in an offer the other day up by Loon Lake. But having like a chunk of land that could have the potential to be self-sufficient if needed. So at the worst case is if AI does take over and there is no jobs, at least my kids could come live on we could farm, carrots and shoot the odd rabbit or something like that. So I'm trying to set it up as like, I think our generation might have the unfortunate responsibility of being like shit on by a financial crisis and then a pandemic in like our two most key parts of our lives. And then we'll have to take on the responsibility of like a very uncertain future and our kids not having the opportunities that we had. And so then shifting towards like, how do we ensure they have some level of opportunity? Like, I really don't know, but like, that's how I think about it a lot. It's like, if I set myself up in a way of stability so that my kids could be near me and safe and fed, if there was no, like, worst case scenario is no jobs, then like, at least they'll have that. Rather than being like, inner city Vancouver in a condo, being like, well, you guys are 28 and you're sleeping in bunk beds because you can't find a job. It's like, that's the way I just kind of think about it.
Well, I know we're at time here. Where can people find you and what you're up to?
My best channel right now is Instagram. I've really leaned into that in the last couple months. So it's im.dylanjones, DYLAN, and then profitlaunchpad.com.
Awesome. Thanks very much for being on here, man. All right. Take it easy.